kuku tapuaki te kamata hokalei ai. Oi pua hokahelo maalia ai tatu kolokalami. Pua mole atu ai au, te mana kai au, mole ko ke te tala mai e koe, tatu ahui, tapuaki.
Tatu te inga tatu te mana. Te tua te alo ma te tua te ngā toia. Nai tātou, tātou kamoi moi te tālo I te tua I te ngai. Let us come before God in prayer. Ka iho tātou I te tua. Te tua tō mātou te mana I te langi. Koe lava ko te tua o te kāmatanga o me hou. Koe ko te atua haka manuianga, ko te atua o te aloha ma te angarelei. Ko te atua ihu ma puno no ki e ki mātou o matau whanau. Koe mahi lava, ko he ngā ruenga, o uma, ma eto, na hai ki mātou, e te tau lava na whiwhiki aki ki mātou ki tāu hio e kā mata ai te haka moe moe. Te atua hako tai mo tēnei ngā ruenga hui tā ma te ngali. Te ngai eima mātou whanau te komiti, te mātou tūpulanga Fakaofo, te kolokalami ko haunia. Na koe tai mō lātou kaihima o lātou wāpanoa kai mahi ko te poto ma te mālama lama. Kai hili ai, to lātou wola ko te anganga. Ka koe tai te atua, o te hoani o mātou ta mana ma o mātou mātua te tāpua ki ngai loto nā ka inga. Ka koe tai te atua ki te lātou te tālo hei pēa lava pēa. Wā tēnei ngā luenga. Ko tai te hohoni mai to nganga pa ia te atua ko mai e ki la tau ko na hai te ngarueng. Kai mai lava te hohoni ko e hu to ma to oliki. Ko lava ko te takitaki o takitaki. Aloha mai ko. Ko mi mai to ma to ko mai moi te ahi nei. Ka ma te manuia. Sai ko ki te manuia te viking o tau o fia. Lord God, our loving Father, your love is our protection and your grace is our hope. Leaving behind the distractions of the day, we look for the directions that will guide our tomorrow. So Lord our God, we have gathered here this afternoon with families, friends, and the community to bless the beginning of the Vakaola Tupulanga Symposium program that initiates practical approaches for the educational and cultural development of its youth, and to acknowledge the historical journey. Gracious God, our loving Father, you are the God of new beginnings, so we ask you, Father, for your blessings upon the organizing committee, the board, the staff, and especially our young people, our Whakaoho, Tokelau young people. May your Holy Spirit lead, guide, and direct them in all their endeavors. These are our prayers, O God. We ask in through the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Thank you for your blessings, Reverend Bremer. Thank you also for being available to come through, both yourself and especially your wife, Aonatama. One of the things about this evening will be that we will speak both Tokelauan language and English, and we will change and chop whenever we feel like doing that. And so there's no hard, fast rules about when to start talking Tokelauan, when to stop talking English, because we'll just do whatever we want to do. And why we want to do that is because part of our community, our Tokelauan community, hear the language often, but don't have the opportunities often to engage in the conversations in the Tokelauan language. So this is one of those opportunities that if you don't talk or speak in Tokelauan a lot, but you would like to, then this is a great opportunity for you to do that. And also, if you don't speak English too well, then this is also another good way for you to learn. And so without further ado, I would like to ask one of our other elder members of the Tokelau community, Toyaina, e tātou, inei, Polilua, tamana tēnā ki a tohu, puli, mone mone, e tūtahi mai kō koe, ke pai hoki e kohi ka mā kupu heiroa.
Tātou mahatanga, lō tamai, mana hoi te au me te maka pare tua. Kei rahi o tātou hao nima kua. Mea tātou te mana hoi te au. Kua mana iai tātou whia hi te nei. Hei hoki ni kuku oe. Ta mu mai tō ena kei hoi ati. Hei hoki nāka tātou hei kai lau ki tua. Ko mo hoi mau nā wanowe nei he no aki eki tātou. Taratara no ai tātou. E ka mata e ia tātou mahutanga. E toi hokai ko hoki e i. Tātou ko mo rā tō nā rohi tō nā ngalele. Nā kukura mai ia. Ke mahuta mai ni tātou. E karamata hoki au i whahoi. E ngā au ngā mai ko i Hawaii. Ko tāra watu i te koutou umale nā mātua nā tamana ma nā whanau. E pia lele ke. Ke pirati ki te koutou. Te mahuta mai mi tangata New Zealand, ko tō wharongo, ko tō te leo ki mātou e kehete. Paka Tokelau kehete ka pālanga. Me hea wau i te, nei he koe lote me, auna, he, tō wawala. Ma o te awha i tūrani, haki lei e. Ka hea wau ki ka wala, e tau ki mātou me te tiki. He ko vei loto i kine. Petro, kumule wana ko e kola, number 13, Lawrence Bay, me lava. I don't know. Petro, au, please, ko koe he Amerika. Iyo. E kera te me hoi te hono, me tui ei. O te ngā nai, heo te Amerika hoka hinu mai nā wala. E pe hoke laka te tātou heo. E kira toke rawa weo mai nā tino Amerika, Hawaii hoka hinu mai ki tātou nā mea ki tātou haia. Manuia nā huahuanga ki tātou ko, roka te tua. Manuia mai ki te koutou umane. Leo te kupu. O ia tia, manuia rawa koutou. Tātou. Ria.
This day is about the identity of a people, and that people are the Tokelau people. And while the minister presented the day to you as Vakaola conference, they are the organisers, but the actual invitations are inclusive of the whole of the Tokelauan group. And so we welcome everyone here this evening. Our first speakers that we have, one of our mothers, well-known mothers here in Wellington, who currently live in the Hutt Valley, Susanna, and also one of our well-known daughters, Nila, Lemihio, Waiha, who will be coming up shortly to share some of the experiences, of their experiences to you all. And some of the things that I want you to think about as people are talking are things like to try and understand what their experiences are about. As Tokelauan people who were either born in Tokelau or the islands, and raised for the rest of their time here in New Zealand up until the present time, or to try and understand their viewpoints as people who are born here in New Zealand and facing challenges for themselves. And the target group for tonight has been about young people, but I think all of us have something to contribute to their knowledge and their learning. So at some point, if anyone here thinks that, oh well, I've just heard something interesting from the speakers, and you want to ask a question, or you want to make a comment, that's fine. You just need to put your hand up, one at a time, and we'll give you that opportunity, and the speakers will try and answer your query for you. Otherwise, without further ado, I would like to introduce Susanna, Lemihio, and also Nila, Lemihio, Waiha.
Na matua, na toeaina, na kamai, na hanau, la to jahanei. Ke kamata tu e au, hobe ko to ilo umalele, topui mo ako huhana, ni. Kon hanau Tokelau, kon hau ki niu hila kuhului wa tauhanga. Toka 5 taku hanau, toka 3 ia te ine, toka 2 ia tama. Ka toka 5 ia makupuna ni tamauma. Watu laki anila ka ke uhi watu kohe maha atele ke veka hakatomua ai tātou wahiahi. Iyo. He pehe ni. Mole mole lava. Te tangi o te kakai. Te tangi o te kakai. Hakaloha e tui e. Vakaola. O kumatua, wa teli mahei. Wa teli, kamatatu toku tamana. O te matua wa teli, ko lehina. O te matua lehina, ko haolo, makawai. Le malat matot toku tamana, o te kainga hokamokai. He so na matua na he hina Vakaola ko lehina. E yo na uho ko he tahia. Matalena. Le mai te kainga noho ina mo. Ko toku matua. Ko toku matua ko malia hei. Ko te tamana toku matua ko hatia. Ko te matua hatia. Ko potu vaka. Ko potu vaka, ko tonu tamana, ko te taulu. Te taulu e hau yalita. Ko au latu vene atu, ko au hihi a lele haka hetai ki nā whanau, nā lātou walakaulia. E uina lava e vai, ka kuaha ka malohi mai, e te tino e aia nā ngā luenga. Haka hetai lahi lele.
Halo.
Tulong ni kina matua na tamana na toina na no matutua kai mai he hoki na whanau e hokataloha tu ki te kaumalanga mai Hawaii. Koko nila le mihio poaha. Tēnā kua tala tu taku matua te tu ki te iai Vakaola. Ka ke tala tu la e au te tu ki o toku tamana ki Vakaola hoki. Ko toku tamana ko te ohilo kai naki le mihio. O na matua ko hipili, ko leni matahi. Ko na matua leni matahi ko hipili mahehilia. Ko hehilia, he ohine Vakaola, ko tona matua ko matalena. Ko matalena he uhe o lehina mahetahi mpalepa. I tahi tula toku tamana, te kainga hipili, ko te tamana hipili, ko pulunone, ko te tamana, ko nā matua pulunone, ko lea ma te au tahi. Ko toku te la e tau ki te kainga o lea. I tahi tula, i te au lapa, ko toku kainga, toku awang ko himona poaha. Ko himona, e ahoho mamalau. Hove e loa koutou, ngā mātou i e nā. Ko tēla, ko hoki e leki toku mam, ko hoki e huhe tu vene o wa i e te mātaliki, ko te uluaki, au tū taloheanga lomi tuhi o koaha. I just want to quickly just acknowledge the speakers of both languages as well. Just to quickly say who we are. My name is Nila Nemihio Poaha, and I've just explained my connection to Vakaola. My mother's connected me through her side, but also to acknowledge my father's side, and also my husband's family as well, through our son, Te Luaki Poaha. So just to let everybody know, for today's presentation, my mother and I, we're going to share a personal narrative. It's a personal story about living in New Zealand as Tokelauan women. We're going to also explore our different ways of looking at the world. For me, I'll be looking at from a New Zealand born perspective, some of us call that. I tend to use the first generation perspective. But I think the beauty about being Tokelauan, we're able to choose how we want to sort of look at the world in those sort of lenses. My mother will be talking about how she came to New Zealand on the government resettlement scheme, and from that we're going to share our personal narratives and stories about what we think has been useful for us to live in New Zealand and to make it our place in the sun. After our talk, also, we're really open to any questions or any discussion points people want to ask us. The other thing that I think is really important for us to share, that we're just one voice. We know that there's many people in this room who also have their own personal stories of how they've lived in New Zealand and what's helped them sort of succeed and survive in this world. So thank you very much again. And we'll start with my mum's presentation.
On hana Tokelau. Ko te kawatunga na hakamalamalama na tala ki te government resettlement scheme. Ko ana hia help New Zealand. Ko ana hau I te narua o group na mai ki New Zealand. Toka vai tamai tinu kunonu, toka ono e hoka oho, toka ono ya taku. Koi ko mana tua lava na tamai tina mai ki matou. O toku hia matoku whahuia ko au ka hano kehe ma Tokelau. Ko toku hia I loa kehe nei he tahi lalolangi atu o Tokelau. Ko au ka healthy New Zealand ko he nua hou. Sorry ko taku ko au ele atu haka tautala atu haka Tokelau. Au aka te ngana ia elele ia taku tautala. Mina ko mole mola na matua mana tamana. O mai ki mātou, ko au na heki la lele ki te mihia ka ko au wahahi lele ko ka hawi Tokelau e sa nai ka kua hului vai ku tauhanga ko au ko I tamai. Hea wau I te waka ki hea moa, mātou na mai te waka, ko te taimi la kua ngalo I hove ai lava ia nuku nonu, o taimi te nā kua he mahai te unalo I mata. Kua lahona ai te manatu, ma te kona mātua kua mihi, kona nā tua ngane ma nā tua hine kua mihi, kona wō ma nā mea kai, heo he mea kua tā vili vete ma hau hau, kua veka ka heo te manatu. Pa mai ki hea moa, kua kehe hoki te hōlanga. Nā hea ni tā wale nuku nonu. E pa mai ki mātou I te waka ki hea moa, ka kilatu ki mātou ki ngā uta o apia, ie nei lawa nā. Makalo he mea, makalo he, ta vetu lava au. Ni ko ni mai le. Kale mai au peta. Ke loa, he tino to tuhi ona lima, he ni mai le. Ko ni tā vale. O mātou, hai katata. Ni ko te me ko tamai ti hei loa he ki te he tā vale mōni, nā ko nā ata. Pa mai ki te taimi mua hatoa kai au ke haru pulini. Ko ka longo ki te mutu ve e mū. ele au ki na tamai si he ko ni paulava te me ko paki e te whatoa hau Tokelau he ni ahi kulimi he ni tā vale ko nā hale ko loa ua hua e whaai ku mahau whaau ia o mai ai ki hea moa ko mātou ko te muna ia heo e o peta ua mātou hai kata heo e a mio haka Tokelau Io ka paki a pia ko mātou e muna ia heo e o peta. Naha ia naha ngā lue ngā i te ofio. Tā mai ki New Hila, wa tehe te wātili ai te whanoa noa i te mihia nā kāinga. Wa manatu ki nā mātua, mihia nā mea kai, nā te ngangana, kai mahe te ngangana. Ka kitea nā hwale, nā hole whai ngā luenga ma nā hole koloa, ewe e mataku nā lihui, he mahai ke olo ki he lihui, e komana tua lele, te mātou hakatakitaki ngā mātou ki e i te mālo, i whama i Wellington, e komana tua lele kouku he komahai au, ta wali aku he wa e kouku noho ki lano. Ele mai nā iao peta. Te hato apa mai ngā te lahi o te lahi o te he hao hia, a wakua lahi te mihia nā kāinga. Ko nā pō e tangi ai e muhiukai nā pateta, e muhiukai nā me māmoe, e muhiukai nā kukahaka pālangi lava, kai uhia kai me, uhia manaku lele ki Tokelau ki nā mea kai. Ma te tau. E o mai ki mātou ko te winter, he hia, e heo nā ahiu i nā ngutu, wa lahi a lele ai te mataku, hia hanu ki Tokelau. Ma te kehe o nā mea e paki e. Wa hano te o langa, ve ka tau mahani. Ve ka haka tau. Ko te o lahe mahan, ko te ve ka auma te manatu. Wa iei nā heo ninga nā pātele mana taupo hea te ki mātou. Mātou vaenga nā noho i te hat. He tino kuhai po ipo, o ni single girls and boys. O i ko mātou kua ki sea i nā lotu, wa o mai la o i tahilihili mai, ke heo ni mai ko mātou ka kawe ki nā night school, i te Polytech i Lower Hutt, o ko mātou nā lau malele ki e. Kua kehe hoki la te kikilanga, ku vehe whai te toka ku matala, kua matala mai ki te ki mātou, ko nā hai a aonga, ka ngā lele te lelei, e o mai o tawe ki mātou ki nā Kio lātou konga i Paraumu, pai kariki, o i kawe ki nā weekend, o i whakanoho ai ki ngā. Mananga luko o tahi mea nai hōwai ki te ingi lihi, ke hoka he tau i ki nā ngā luenga. Awa, o nā ngā luenga he mahai ke hoka Tokelau, ka ko te hoka pālangi. He ai te tino, mātou wāhana mai he kre he mātou tino nā pāki nā aonga i hea moa. Na mihi ai la wa ko ki tua ngane ma ku tuha huine na pāki nā aonga i hea moa ka ko au he ki pāki nā aonga i ka ko au o hia kua pāki hea ko konga veki nā ingilihi hui kuka o mātou night school ia nai whai mātou waenga nai noho i Lower Hutt na he ko mātou ki o ioti nā teine hea moa ma nā tama hea moa nā tamai o mai nā tahi whenua nā ka wei nā aonga i mai nā pō. Ua tau mahai hoki mātou o nā socialize ki nā tino, ni ki nā tahi tamai ki hea moa, nā tamai ki pālahi mā mātou o. Ia, hano te o langa, ua Pe tau ia ki māua mā te o hilo, kai naki le misio na hau i hea moa e hau ki te ami. No noho ki māua i te haunga i na hano ki Malay ma Vietnam i te haunga. Pe tau ia ki māua no hoi ki maua I tau hanga o Novalu. Toka 5 mahanau, toka 3 I te ine, toka 2 I tama. O taimi tēnā e mihi au toku mami. Awa, nā e komana tua ka kouko I Tokelau, kou e heo ani ki o kuuheo, nā pepe, e mihi ala e au, nā ko au tau tahi tauhi e au, e reise e au aku tamai ti. Tako au nai taumahai lava, ke komahai e te o langa hoka niuhila. Nā e hia koi loa ai la, nā hekotanga, e iei te plunkhead, e iei te health nurse, e iei nā te heo ani mai, nā hea ni tino nā lea mai. Ke loa he, e mihia la te, e mihia e au. Kako toku mihia tēnā, I te toka 5 te, nā mahai ai e au, o I reisa ki tamaiti toka 5, tau tahi, kai te tamana o lātou, he tahi hea poti lahi lele ki te au, I te tauhinga o te mahanau. Ai taumahai lava ke koiloa nā tiute hoka mātua, ma nā hikili hoka mātua, e veko nā tahi hine palahi. E loa e kou e hihi a lele o tahi lihili, ka mai he ko nā tapo hea nā mahani e oi. Ahi atu o hohe ni atu ki te mātou I nā, ka koi hoi whānau ai ki mātou. Ia te tupu ake I tamaiti, ua lahi te kitea penia nei te hohou nā moimitinga whanau e hohou ki tātou ki ei. Ia kai mai he lava tēnei tamata inga, a waka tātou e kehe lava o tātou dreams ma nā hope I e tahi mea e tutuhea, ka ko toku tangata nei e hea kilikili. E heo hea manoa e hoki mai, e hono hea kiri lava te mea e he tau I ki tamaiti, he tau I a iau mo taku whanau. Matau ka inga, e lahi te heke mai o oku, ko au ke hano ki whaho, ke ko ki ea nā heo he opportunity e ko maua, e heo ni a iau ki te tau kilanga taku whanau. Ona join ki te Pasifika, ko toku hia I loa lava nā opportunity. O I koi loa ai ki nā e iei nā ako akonga e maua I leko te ana ako akonga ki whanau, nā preschool, ia nā taumahai te tangata tēnei ke loa nā awanoa ie ke hapoti ai a whanau. Olo I tamaiti ki nā onga, ko au nā he ngā lue. Ko au nā he ngā lue I te toka 5 te. Kako te mea nā whahia I au, nā maukoloa I au, ko au muri ki tako whanau. I heo he activity, I heo he ngā luenga, ma heo he mea lava e tutupu mai te tamaiti ke pari te Polytech Varsity, ko au e muri lava ke ko I loa awa e koki tea, he aonga hoki ki te au, ke ko I loa ke mahana ai mātou mahutanga. E mihi ai la e au mātou, te ulu mātou kahe ngā ua e hoki mai nā wanoa I ke involva I au ki tamaiti, ke pari nā polihi, nā primary, nā polihi. Komana tua, te mai ngā te plunkhead pe kua involve taku tamaiti ki te kindi, ka le au. Hea te kindi, hea tēnā. Ia haka matala mai uma, o muri lava au ki nā wala e ua ko hea huia ki nā mea nā koa konga. Le nā hoki la nā primary. Mana polihi. Le mai tahi vai aonga ki tahi tama aku. Pokoe na he pokole te pātau tamaiti. Ka hei mahai e te wahiti, ko tau tamaiti e relei no mela. E relei o na 5. Ka te hea hui e muri ki te me ki tona strength, ko te Kiona lima kina carpentry, follow ye o ka poti ki ye. Ia na manuia na vena hoki lava. Le mai tuhe ko ye tahi subject, kai muli lava ki te strength o tau tamaiti. E vena umalai taku kila ki te toka lima, ko au he matua poto, ko au he matua maukoloa, ka ko au maukoloa, te mahana ki mato kainga. E vena hoki la ki te kina community involvement, ko te na iei na hopes na dream te mato peoa, mato toea ina, mato ulu te kainga, te maua he pa, te malu, o ta whana o te umiuminga I loa hat. So, na drive hat ki e te mato toea ina, o ina maua lava, na maua, na kitea ia te vision, ma te hopes, ma na dreams o ia, ke pa mai ki tai mine, kua malu ai whanau a Tokelau, pe heo ka la ki tuputonga ma Tokelau I te hat reli, pe ko Wellington e. He nā ko Tokelau hoki ka heo he hoka la ki tuputonga. E iei nā, hove iei nā mea he maalia te koto hokalongo pini mea kua mihia e au, tako te ne mai e lu hulu minute o yoti pe he hulu minute. I tamaki lang, tohu lava te lunga mātua mana tools ke mo te lunga naki o kāinga ni. Ka hoi e he tuhe ai ma te whakalongolongo kai pau lava ko nā mea ia kua. Kua tuhi atu, te loka nā mea lele ia ki tātou, whai pēa, te mana ia he kāinga o la hia, mātua, mahānau, matukuna. Ke whai pēa, discipline, whaka routine, awa, ka hoi e hoi atu kutala, ka he hoi tae ao, o noho e playing up ai whanau. Nā me tau he lotu, ke hoka manatu pēa ki whanau, ma he mea mana ia, ko kāinga ratou tau hia nā me tau te lotu, e muri pēki e. Ko te communication, ke hoka mahana I tamaiti, ko te hoka tau hoka hoko takinga. Te mana ia hoki ke heuna langona whanau, ke tātou langona, o ka watu o tātou langona ke hoka pāleni. E ako ai hoki au tuku talitonu ki te au, e komahai ai hoki talitonu ki tamaiti. Tau look after ourselves, ka hai kua vai pe hitata, toka lahi na kai, e nā whanau, mana hewa, ke tātou malo, ke lahi malolo, ka waho ke tātou hitai le mātua, ma te heo ni mai hoki e tamana ma whanau. Be yourself and don't try to be anybody else. Ka hai leo atu nā friend aku tamaiti ki te hale, toka lima taku whanau, ka ko te heoloa, ko au he mahai ka pālangi ki nā tamaiti, ko au haka Tokelau ki nā tamaiti. Ka hai hoki e o mai, e talia lava I tamaiti a lātou o ke o mai, ka ko au ko e hoka Tokelau lau ki nā tamaiti, ka hai he malama tau mahai a ke hoka pālangi. Be positive. I te au ko te muna. Le e atili tuli ai e tamaiti. He hia kalongo mai tamaiti ki te muna. Kai tau mahai hoki ke maalu te loto te mātua. Ke e hoki sense of humor. Ko mātou te maiti sometimes e toki lava kou kua hiwa I loto te hale u hiwa kua atele pe hiwa au te leiti o pe ko te TV, even mai mokopuna, ko mātou e hihiwa, ko mātou e ko au e hano ki lalo ki e lātou lewo. Ko tātou ni role model ni, ka veve nau malele ia mātua, awa tahai e kehe tuha tātou pupuma tātou actions, te hanonga haki lo te nao. o hanau. Awa ka te hea ku talau I he mai ia e au. E iei he ilo pe he tau iai ki maha hau e tamaiti. O te ngangana ma te I a ngā nuku family tree mahani oi whakataratara noa nā ngaha. Kai he maha iai ke mihia ke he tino hia hea oi ko au ke aski he tino ki hea ani ko au e hia lele ko au ke kahai he mea vai vai ai au ko au e tau stila ki nā tino ke he tino ke hea ani mai. Kahai he longa he Whakapitahu hakamutalanga pehe jaya nei ka mga no mai tene tangata ka whakahitai lahi.
My mother's sort of set the scene to how I'm going to be sharing my journey, my view on the world as a Tokelauan born in New Zealand. And I just want to say that the way I look at the world at the moment, I'm a daughter of Tokelau migrants, as they're probably described in New Zealand, but I actually think that they were invited to come to New Zealand. My mother was asked to come to the government, on the government resettlement scheme. My father was asked to come and join the New Zealand Army, so I always like to think that they were visitors first before they were migrants. So that's how I also position myself when I'm viewing my place as a Tokelauan in New Zealand. I'm also a wife of a Tokelauan migrant, but also again I think he was invited to come to New Zealand to get his education. As you know, New Zealand is looking after Tokelau, so we're needing to also expand further to come out to New Zealand for further education from Tokelau. Himona's parents, Hohain Malau, they had dreams and hopes like all parents do in Tokelau for their son, so they sent him to New Zealand, and they're very proud of their son. He's done pretty well for a person who came to New Zealand from Samoa College to Rotorua Lakes High. I think he's done really well in terms of where he is and with his trade as well. So I want to also acknowledge that's also how I view the world. My husband keeps me grounded and I need to really acknowledge that. I tend to be quite, my brothers would describe it, I suffer from analysis paralysis. So it's really good I'm married to someone who's really grounded and who just views the world as it is. My third point too is that I'm also a mother of a second generation Tokelauan, Te Oroaki Puasa, who is 3 in April. So how I try to view the world now too is quite different to probably when I was 10 years ago, because I've got to pave the way for him so that he won't go through some of the struggles I went through, or some of the struggles his father went through, or some of the struggles his parents went through. I want him to grow up knowing he has his place in the sun in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and that he also has his place in the sun in the whole universe. So that's my perspective that I'm going to talk about from a generation, first generation Tokelauan. I think I've just started talking about the multiple worlds. I think for Tokelauans living in New Zealand, who are born here, we have multiple worlds, multiple lenses, multiple viewpoints. We see the world differently. We're described in our ethnic settings as Tokelauans, but I think each one of us are different and unique in our own ways, although we come from the same place, our parents have brought us up differently, but we can still get on really well together. So for me, my family values is what's brought me up to who I am today, and I was really fortunate enough to have not only live in an immediate family environment, but also the extended family. My parents looked after my grandfather, my mum's father, and I'm sure a lot of other Tokelauan families can relate to that as well. My parents also looked after 8 scholarship students from Tokelau. My parents have also looked after families, their brothers and sisters coming from Tokelau, my other grandparents when they're coming over. So sometimes we have about 23 people in our house, 2 bedrooms, And I remember at the age of 10, we were really short of mattresses, and I think some of us can share this. I remember sleeping in a cot with my little baby brother because we didn't have enough room. But at that time, we didn't realise that that's called overcrowding at that time. So those family values have also helped me to shape who I am. And I also think the Christian value base that we also come from is really important. Our parents, they really have installed that in us. And I know in some of my journey during trying to grow up in this world, the Christian values have really centered me. Te ngā nuku haka tokelau, I always see these things. Aloha, whakaaloalo, tauhi te wāhe aloaki, e tautua. Those are the 4 words I always hear, especially my father talk about, because he was very into the community. He always said that you need to give service to the community. Don't expect anything back. What you give, don't think you're going to get anything back. You just give it all to the people because that's your people. So my community values has really been around how I've grown up in the Hutt Valley, but I also believe that it's also helped me be comfortable moving around Puriroa when I'm in other areas around the country. I've yet to explore to go to Hawaii, so I look forward to that one day. But those sorts of things are important. And also too, my education. My education's also played a big part because for us, my parents really pushed that into us. They really drove that home for us. They had different sort of ways of looking at it too. My father was a very hard but very principled man, and for him, he said to us kids, every time he puts on his overall when he goes to work in a car battery factory, he was doing that for us kids to do really, really well at school. So now that I'm at this age, I've got a son, I can really see the impact of how important it is just to really acknowledge just how hard our parents have sacrificed a lot of their time for us to do really well. And I also think we tend to sometimes think education is in schooling. I like to think education happens everywhere we go. Education isn't just what happens in our classrooms in front of a teacher, where they're speaking English, where they're teaching maths and science, all those things. I think education is really what you see as learning that's worthwhile. My cultural upbringing also played a really important part in viewing the world differently. And being a first generation New Zealand Tokelauan, I didn't really know I was a first generation Tokelauan probably until I was a teenager. And I'll just read you this poem that I wrote at that age, that this is what I was going through, just to get a sense of the identity crisis, they call it. I think that's what it's labelled by psychologists that teenagers go through. So here's a poem that I wrote when I was finding out about what it meant to be Tokelauan living in New Zealand. Battlefield. I'm living in a battlefield when I'm always asked, hey Leela, what are you? Where do you come from? I'm Tokelauan, but I was born in Aotearoa. Sometimes I'm asked, which atoll do you belong to? Nukunono, Whakaoho Ataho? I don't know. You know, I may not dress Tokelauan, I may not talk Tokelauan, I may not dance Tokelauan, but I am a New Zealand born Tokelauan, and yes, I do care which atoll I belong to. I'm connected to all 3 atolls, take it or leave it. That's a poem I wrote probably at the age of 16, 17. So that was another avenue that I was able to use was writing about my identity. And I'm sure some of us have different avenues of trying to express our identity. The thing that I think we as Tokelauans have to be really, really proud of, and I remember the 2000 tournament in Puriroa, and I'll never forget the MC at the opening, and that was our sister Bonnie. She really instilled it in us, and I thought, this is really different. I've never heard this Tokelauan sort of spoken in this way. She was really encouraging us to be proud of who we are as Tokelauans, and I think we need to continually celebrate that. So I think that was a real eye-opener for me at that time. I was kind of isolated from the world because I was studying towards a postgraduate degree at that time, but you know, when people talk in community settings, I think we need to really listen to those words, not only just from our young people, but our old people have said a lot of things, and I really take those to heart for what's being said. I think what's really important is that we've got a premium as Tokelauans who are born in New Zealand. Our premium, even though we may not, it's not our system that we live in, or it's our expat, but I think our family values, we're able to operate in an immediate family setting, we're able to operate in an extended family setting, we're bicultural, we're bilingual. I think some of us are trilingual, tricultural, maybe even more. I think at the last 2001 census, it said 53% of Pacific children are of multiple ethnicities. So I'm sure there's a lot of Tokelauan kids born in New Zealand now that are not just full Tokelauans, but they're either part Samoan, part Māori, all those different identities. I think also what we have as Tokelauans is when we're community connected. That's another school of thought, I say, is when we're involved in the community, where our leaders are also instilling in us some rules of, well, some ways of behaving, ways that we respect our elders, those Tokelauan values I talked about. Our community conditioning, our community upbringing, it's another school of thought, I always say. Something that I always think about as New Zealand, as a Tokelauan born in New Zealand, is the negotiation of the I and we. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about we live in New Zealand. New Zealand's about looking after yourself. You're an individual. You have to try and look after yourself. You've got to go for what you want. At the same time, my Tokelau hat tells me, yeah, okay, I've got to look after myself, but what about my family? What about my brothers and sisters? What about my cousins? So I think all the time, I wouldn't say that it's an identity crisis. I think we're able to, I think we've got to expect that where we shuttle in and we shuttle out, we can choose where we want to be, being Tokelauan as well. Our Christian values, I think that guides us along the way as well. And also as, when I heard my mum talk about, for example, the Plunkett nurse asking her about, have you enrolled your child to a kindergarten? Well, formal education, living in New Zealand is part of our key of opportunities of really going out there, really trying to have the same conversations we can have. The work that I'm involved in, it's work that's really important for the education of our Pacific people. You don't see us doing lots of things on the ground, but it's conversations that happen, and how we say things, it impacts the decisions that the Prime Minister or the ministers make in terms of the future of our kids. So for me, those tools in my formal education setting has really helped me. My background, by the way, is I've trained as a teacher, and so I've stuck in education, I've studied in education, so that's kind of where I see it. But it's not all of me, I keep saying. I think tools to navigate, you can never forget your family as a Tokelauan person. Immediate family, I think the words and the work of my own parents have really paved the way. I think for me and my older sister, we probably experienced a lot more of the stress and the challenges my parents had when they were adjusting to living in New Zealand. So we were like, when I think back now, we're like their guinea pigs of trying to discipline us. And so even though we were disciplined in a way that's probably against the law now, Section 43, I call it. You know, there's no regrets on our part when I think about it now, but because it's what they know. They bring it with them, but they've improved along the way. So my younger three siblings have been the fortunate ones, because my parents learnt about things like you've got to talk positive to the child, if you keep smacking them, that's why they keep doing things the way they do. So your family kind of gives you that room to think, and I think I think if there's some time in our life where we can change the way we view the world as well. Mentors, I think beyond your family influences, and I suppose for me that means you've got to also surround yourself with really key positive people who are not in your family, but you can see are really positive role models for you. And I've been really blessed in having really key people like that. That could be like the minister of your church or the pastor of your church. That could be your manager at work, or even a really good school friend of yours. So I've been really fortunate to have that. And I think for me, some of those have happened by accident, because I was at a college, Sacred Heart Girls College, and at that time there weren't many Pacific or Tokelauan girls at that school, so I used to make friends with my Bilingual friends, and they used to take me to their homes. And so, 2-bedroom home, 5-bedroom home, separate bedrooms, guest rooms, and all of those things. So, to me, I saw that as, wow, I'm going to go to these. I enjoyed making friends with them. They were neat friends, but at the same time, I got to experience something different. My own bedroom, homemade biscuits, all those sort of things we take for granted, and getting to ride a bike, because I never had a bike. So I think, and those friends have continued to be some of my mentors in how I've seen the world. The other thing too, I think is really important for us as Tokelauans born in New Zealand, is that we've got to be resilient to change. We have to be really strong, because some of the challenges that we're faced with is a struggle that sometimes we don't impose on ourselves, but sometimes the system imposes on us. But I think we've got to be really strong in ourselves, because I always think, man, my parents came here at the age of 19, 18, they had no word of English, so I think if we're really strong in that and we're resilient, I think that's a really key tool. Education and life experiences, although I did a lot of things like going to school and that, but I also enjoy other things. I'll get into that another time. But there's a lot, singing, I like to write and things like that. The other key thing, and it's something that my father really instilled in me, was pushing the boundaries. You've got to take a risk. You can't satisfy yourself, he used to always say. Never feel sorry for yourself. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do anything. Because I remember when I left school and my principal saying to me, she said, what are you going to do when you leave school, Neil? And I said, I'm thinking of going to Teachers College. And she said to me, well, you had to repeat your sixth form, you didn't get bursary, so do you think you're going to be a really good teacher? And I'll never forget what my father said. My father said to me, don't let anybody tell you what you can't do. And I think if I had listened to that advice of that principal, I don't think I'd be also where I am, enjoying working with the community and so forth. So that is one of the key points for me, is pushing the boundaries. I hope that this is just my own perspective, and I'm sure some of you would have your own. And just to finish on that too, is that there's 5 of us. I'm only sharing one perspective of what reflects my mother's upbringing. I've got an older sister. She's had many journeys in her career path. She's a qualified chef. She's a qualified secretary. My brother, who lives in Australia, he's a carpenter by trade, so he's chosen that pathway. My other brother has chosen to still explore his career pathway. And my younger sister, she's a very able young mother who's chosen to stay at home to look after her 2 children. So we've all got different pathways, and I just want to thank you for this opportunity again. And just to leave you with this, I was going to sing a song, but I'll just leave it up there. This is a song that was composed by me and my sister and my 2 cousins in 1987. This is a song about saying how the youth really want to know who they are. They're really encouraged by wanting to learn the language, and they're really proud of who they are for their own. So.
That was a good time. If anyone has any questions they want to ask. Or not. Or you really want to hear her sing a song?
Yes.
Yes, we heard it you at the back. Thank you.
I'll just sing it, okay? Hello, Kitupulanga, o Tokelau Inuhiwanei, te atua kamore more vehoani mai, aua te nangana, haka Tokelau, e matiba, kokamaiti e hakatangi, awe, awe, awe. Ko te tupulanga e hahuia ke hakamane ke te ngangana. Tawa Tokelau e te roi te loto. Te la ka tauto Tokelau. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you both for presenting to us. And you've set the bar, which means that every other person that speaks tonight will also have to sing a song. We'll sing a song, dance, it's up to you, whichever one you want. So thank you both very much. And still, if there are any questions that people want to ask through the evening, you can ask those things.
Tai te manaia o te tala mai Tokelau ke pāmai ki te first and second generation Niula pēna pāmai e nila mata matua. E whakarongotu ki te tala ato ni matua te lahi o nā mea hou na tau ki ei ve ia tai atu te lime e ve mutu a ia tu ia lata me te nā iei tahi mea kai ngā tā nei kulawan mahai lewa ia ke veia ko te noho i kāinga noho i whakaparangi mahai ma ola ai loko ue mahai nā mena i mena hei mahai e me te whalango tamtala ola e ia heko nā ma te New Zealand born vea na kau mai e nila ia e te kupua New Zealand whakao ngā pushing the boundary ia ko mea te matua mai ua na hei e loa i whakao ngā te askulini ka i kuiku lapa ko noho e whale ko mhai ke ola lei ai ola mai te New Zealand born oi whai ei te himea ko hana ki te universite ko whai ko ngā ola e vihili atu ia lai e tahi mea e tau ke kikila ki ei na New Zealand born ma na second Tokelau generation i New Zealand ke ki te ve ko te tamu hai te mātua te nei ki hoka tau i tana haunga kiki nei nia lai e tahi mea e tamu hai e whanau a Tokelau na New Zealand born ma na second generation New Zealanders ke e whai ke mama la mati i ki nei
Malo, heo ko te tau he hiri tēnā e tuku atu lawa ki te floor. So one of the issues raised by Dr. Yuta Tinielu, in looking at some of the issues that were raised by our mother Huhana and also Nida, were things like their experiences when they first came here, first time experiences. So then the question that's been put out is, what other experiences then, similar things, might other people have come across? Or what other challenges might other people have come across in transit from the islands to New Zealand, or not necessarily New Zealand, because we have people here not from New Zealand, from the islands to Hawaii, Samoa to Australia. What other experiences would people like to also share?
What are the boundaries that you can foresee as a New Zealand born or a second generation New Zealander? What are the boundaries? What are the areas that you need to understand, like how your mother coped with the situation in New Zealand when you came? Are there any other situations in New Zealand that not a Tokelauan born mother, but New Zealand born Tokelauan they need to look at?
This is just a personal perspective again that I just want to share. I think for me, like I said earlier on, to me pushing the boundaries is about stepping out of my comfort zone. That means I have to, what I know already from what my parents have given me, from what my family have brought me up in, is because I want something more than for my son, as an example. So I want him to still have the best of going to school. So I knew that, for example, that if I choose to stay at home, I'd have that quality time bonding with my son, as an example. But I've chosen to go to work to give my son a better life living in New Zealand, so I know I can afford that for him. And I know that some people would say in one sense, well, you should be at home looking after your son because it's bonding time. But for me, in order to give my son a quality of life, I have to go to work in order to do that. And so that's one example. The other thing I think for me in terms of pushing the boundaries is that knowing the jobs that are out there, for example, it's for all of us to go for. It's not just for Pālangi or it's just for people who are not Tokelauan. I think we're entitled to the same opportunity as anybody else in the world. And so I've got to learn how to be humble at the same time. I think that's really important, but also at the same time know how to chase that goal that I want to go. So sometimes that might mean I might have to stay up really late at night and do things. For example, like because we wanted to be here, and as you know, there's a lot of community things going. So it's just going that extra mile. My father says you never give 100%, you should always give 150%. So I think that's another thing as well. Yeah. I don't know if that helps, but I'm sure other people might have their own.
Do you think by going back, going to Tokelau, a place where you first you've never been, do you think that's part of pushing the boundaries too?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I never touched on that. I actually went to Tokelau for a year in '97 to teach there for a year. I thought I was going to give service to my community. I thought I was going to give what I had to help them learn what I had in terms of the tools in New Zealand. What I learned for myself personally, I learned more about learning. I went with my mind that I was going to teach the people, teach my kids and everything, but I learned for the first 3 months I was the learner. Tokelau people have really, that trip back to Tokelau really helped me push the boundaries because I had to really learn ki te tauhi o te pāhui aloaki, because I can't say to that person, like in New Zealand, if you have a conflict with a work colleague, you can sort of let it go for a while. But in Tokelau, you've got to deal with it straight away because the person who you probably had the argument with at work is probably your uncle. So that's an example where I knew I had to push my boundaries. That's just an example.
And for those of you who don't know her, she is from Hawaii and is part of a group that has come to from there. And we welcome you to the front. You can give her a hand.
Vakaola te tua, whanau, te kalapo tongo ki a Tupulama Vakaofo I Wellington. Ia ko au ko Betty Hydro Ikis, e hoki e tahi o kuingoa ki na e hoki o Samoa ni, ko e tahi o kuingoa ko Sania, te ingoa te nao toku grandma, ia mawha maile, te ingoa te nao te tuha mo ni, ko matua, ko Paulomalei ia. Ia, te ia te kumatua, te ia te mai I talani o Uncle Sila. Ia, ma te tahi o ke kumatua o te ia e noho mai ma Malaysia, ko Apise Kasua. Ia, ko nā alo matua ia, nā matua mātou ia nei, taki mai lātou te mātou waka, mai Hawaii. Ia, wake manuia te mātou malanga, ko huhia mātou kua peiloaki mana kāinga ki nei. Yeah, praise God, yeah, pikia te tua ni. Yeah, kai mua lava ke hiki te hakutai te tua. Yeah, kino kotona aloha tūnoa, kua penei e tātou. Kua taunuku mai ai hoki tēnei ahi o nā haka moenga o te kalaputonga Vakaola Youth in Wellington. Upa mai e penei tātou ni. Kami tu la te lumanaki Tokelau Yamalika, te aonga tēnā hai malanga mai. Ia ka mole o I tutu mai. Ke hiki tātou vikinga.
Tukinunga.
Manaki, tukinunga.
Tuikina. Stay there, stay there.
challenges. It was very heartwarming to hear very encouraging, wonderful to hear their experiences because their experiences rang soundly in our own heart and in our own experiences, despite the fact that we wound up in a different malo, in a different government, a different state than the rest of our brothers and sisters here in New Zealand. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of those challenges, and then because after all the themes today are the journeys from our homeland, our experiences in the new homes that we've built wherever we are, what are our dreams for the future, and some of the tools that we've found to be successful in this journey and to overcome some of the challenges that face us, faced our parents, and that continue to face our tupulanga, our youth, in these new lands with very different values. And I'd like to begin by saying that despite the fact that the values of the Tokelau society, traditional values of Tokelau, are very different from the values of the Western culture that we live in, I do not believe that they clash to a point where we cannot mediate and negotiate. I believe that we can take the best from both cultures and make the most of the life and the opportunities that we're given in this new land. But we don't disband the wisdom and the knowledge from our ancestors, because these are very valuable. And more, language experts all over the world are realizing today that language, no matter what language it is very important, because once that language disappears, and I think they say that today's rate of language disappearing, there's maybe 30 that disappear every year. This is a tragic thing, and especially tragic to global society, because the disappearance of these languages means also the disappearance of wisdom and knowledge that are in the words and in the practices of the peoples that these languages were used by. And after all, we created language to help us communicate with each other. We created language to perpetuate the values, the things that are important to society. And so the attitudes today of scholars towards language is very, very different. And you find that many people are trying to maintain the life and the knowledge and the values that are intrinsic and part of languages. And the Tokelau language is one of these languages. There are probably 10,000 or so, and this is just anecdotal evidence. This is not firm scientific evidence, but there's about 10,000 Tokelauans in this world. Okay, about 1,500, probably less, in the 2005 referendum, 2006 referendum, excuse me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ioane, but I think there was 1,154 Tokelauans living in the islands. At the same time, nearly 7,000 or 8,000 of us live here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We did a survey in Honolulu in 2005, and we verified there's at least 1,000 Tokelauans living in Honolulu, more in the United States. We don't know how many there are in Samoa and Australia, but probably another couple of thousand. But that doesn't mean all of us speak the Tokelau language, ni? Not all of these 10,000 speak the Tokelau language. And later on, I'll share with you some of the results of the survey, the language assessment survey, to see how many people in Honolulu, in our community, actually speak, understand, or both the language of Tokelau. So So let me just start off with a few notes that I jotted down quickly. What are our hopes and dreams as individuals, as families, as a community of Tokelauans? Having lived and studied Tokelauans community in Samoa, Hawaii, and Porirua, I'll have to say that we share very similar hopes and dreams. A job with a living wage, which means that hopefully dad can go to work, make enough money to pay the bills, while mom can stay at home and nurture the children. I'm sure we share all of these dreams. We dream that our children can go to a good school and find a nice job later on that will, help them be self-sufficient in their adult life. And perhaps even owning a home of our own. And then retiring, living in retirement with, relatively good living standards. These are dreams we share with all other immigrants looking for a future of opportunities for themselves and for their families. But are there unique aspects of dreaming these futures as a Tokelauan? Is it necessarily different to be a dreamer as a Tokelauan woman? For example, you heard Nila testify earlier about her identity. She said, well, it's not a crisis, but oftentimes I find that it has been an identity crisis for me. The answer is, at least for me, a resounding yes. There are unique aspects of being a Tokelau, first generation immigrant in Hawaii. Oftentimes through this realization can come late in life, as it did for me. But navigating a path to success in a society like that in Wellington and in Honolulu presents many challenges. For example, success is measured in different terms by Tokelauan people and different terms by the Western people who live in a Western culture. By Western culture, I mean that lifestyle promoted by the European, American imperialists powers who colonized most of the global societies, including the Pacific in the late 1800s. This is a culture that promotes individual, the I, me, accumulating of wealth. Something very difficult to do as a Tokelauan, as you heard testify to earlier, whose foundational base, Tokelauan foundational base, is the well-being not of the individual, not of me alone, but of the entire kaina. And then the extended hui kaina. Very different. Valerie Salin Green, and I'm sure some of you had been interviewed by her in the 70s and the 80s. Her study of Tokelauan Tupulanga and Niuhila found that a significant number of youth chose to move away from their kainga for a variety of reasons stemming from this very clashing culture. Green also noted that many who chose to live away cited their resentment and displeasure with the idea that wisdom is revered in Tokelau in the elders who suppressed their individual freedoms to express themselves. And this is an unfortunate situation, but living here in Western society, our children are bombarded by the values of this society. You turn on a TV and you are looking at an ad for a product that will satisfy your individual needs. So the music we hear, all of these things challenge our Tokelauan values. For those of us who chose to maintain our identity and stick with a Tokelauan lifestyle, albeit in a new homeland, the challenges can be overwhelming. However, I can tell you that the rewards, and I'm sure many of us in here will agree, that the rewards of living such a lifestyle are many and are profoundly satisfying. Once you truly commit and be faithful and practice these Tokelauan values and traditions, sharing becomes second nature. And what comes around, goes around, comes around again, and the circle continues. And we know this. Yes, even in the midst of our adopted societies, we promote our individual well-being and the well-being of others in our families and communities. These two things do not necessarily have to clash with each other, because we know that one of the tools to succeed in this society is education. And Lumanaki, the children of Lumanaki, know this well. This is something we drill into them. If you don't get the education in that society, how will you know the opportunities that are available to you? One of the things that I plan to bring up when Dr. Yuta asked this question, how do you push the boundaries? What are you talking about? Okay. Pushing the boundary, you can only do that, I believe, if you know what is out there, if you know the opportunities that are out there for you. For example, once I made it to college, it took me a long time, okay? But once I made it to college, I found that there were all kinds of scholarships available. If you don't go and apply for those scholarships, you're never gonna get it, okay? And there were even scholarships that were for this grouping called Native Americans. Native Americans, I thought about it, Native Americans, okay. The definition of Native Americans in the United States is any native peoples who live in lands that were occupied by the United States government. Samoa was one of them. Swains Island, Olohenga was one of them. And who were the native peoples of Olohenga? Hana girl, who are the native peoples of Olohenga? Tokelauans. So I'm thinking, let's challenge this scholarship. I applied for the scholarship, which was through the United Methodist Church. And because of my application and because of the argument I made as a Native American / Tokelauan, they changed their requirements for what they consider to be Native Americans. That is pushing the boundary. That is what Dr. Yuta was talking about. That is what Nila is talking about. We will never get an answer if you don't ask the question. Or if you don't say, well, you know, hey, my people were occupied by the United States government and United States businessmen. Okay, I want to be considered a Native American. So ask, you know, that's, you will only know that, however, if you got an education. If you look and read, got that education that opened up the doors and the options for you. So we're talking about tools. Education, to me, has to be number one in this society. However, grounding that education, you cannot just go out and be educated and think you know you're all that. No, you need those values that, for example, Nila was raised with, that her mother Susana and her father raised on you. Grounding yourself in the values and tradition of your people, the Tokelau heritage. This is something that we in Hawaii, in Honolulu, are attempting to do through the Lumanaki Tokelau i Amerika. This is an educational program that some of us started back in 2004. And the history of this organization is really interesting. One thing very different about our group in Honolulu is that we do not have organizations like this. There is no such thing as a Kalaputonga Tokelau in Honolulu or a youth organization of Tokelauans in Honolulu. Nothing like that. The only organization that you will find that routinely gathers Tokelauan people is the Lumanaki Tokelau in Hawaii. So this was one way, through the language, and because we value our language, because we value the wisdom and values that are part of the words in the Tokelau language, this is our attempt then to revitalize. So with that, I'll just briefly take you then through a presentation which I called Grassroots Language Planning. And through this grassroots language planning, we have managed to form the first organization of Tokelauans in Honolulu. Just a brief historical background, language planning, and then language maintenance as developing a community. So these are the three main issues that we'll be talking about. Quickly, historical background. There you see Tokelau right about Western Samoa. Sure, most of you know where it is already. Tokelau, the history of the Talawa, consists of Atahu Nukunono Vakaola and Olohenga. That grouping. Okay. This is the historic lands of people of Tokelau. However, in the 1850s, Olohenga became a copra plantation. And also, in the 1860s, the slave ships, na Vakaola, visited Tokelau in the 1860s and removed over 50% of our tupuna. Okay. Thereafter, the control of Tokelau over Olohenga became very, very weak. And Olohenga began to slip away under the influence of copra plantations. The copra plantation also brought in indentured labor from other places, Solomon Islands, Samoa, Tuvalu, Funafuti, and places like that. And so you find that the people of Olohenga have all kinds of mixtures in them. Okay, they're Tokelauan Samoan, Tokelauan Solomon Islanders, and so on and so forth. In 1925, excuse me, how can I go back, Joe? In 1925, we know that Olohenga was removed from the grouping of Tokelau and became an officially annexed to the United States of America. And thereafter, Olohenga became part of American Samoa, a territory of the United States. Okay, so that's the what the Talama de Talahoai na Matua, Atahu Nukunono Vakaola Olohenga. Tato Nukuye nei. Ka ko pa mai te ahi helau lima, ko Olohenga, ko tō kehe matamalo Tokelau, na tin Tokelau, kua colonize, kua lohoia na te malo Amerika. Yeah, ko te ahi nei today, Olohenga continues to be part of American Samoa. Today, Tokelau officially or politically consists of Atahu Nukunono Vakaola, ko Olohenga ia e ben kua ngalo. Ko ngalo. Ko hai hoki tātou nā kupu, te tūtoro. Te tūtoro kupu kua takalahi lele ni I te nukoni hila. Ia e be kua kangalo ai Olohenga today then is part of American Samoa. In the 1950s, there was a labor dispute between the people, the Tokelau people in Olohenga. And what transpired after that is over half the population were evicted or forcibly removed by the government, the sitting government of American Samoa at the time, and the plantation, who noted that Olohenga was private property and no one had a right to say anything about it. So the grouping then, the Tokelauan people who were removed from Olohenga were taken to Amelika Hamoa. Oi noho ai lavalato. One of the problems with Tokelauans in American Samoa is that they are not Samoans. And so consequently, they have no rights to lands, they cannot own a business, they were marginalized, they became an invisible minority in Samoa. So the people of Tokelau in Samoa at that time continued looking for opportunities elsewhere. Okay. By this time also, the institutions that ground Tokelau values and traditions, like the Uluhina, Tokelau, Nina, Tueina, those institutions were probably fairly removed by that time because the O'odham society was very, very different from the society in Tokelau. So by the time the group moved to Amelika Hamoa, and by the time of the migration to Hawaii, those institutions that promote and continue Tokelau values and traditions were gone, including the language. Very few speakers then. So from Tutuila, another migration of Tokelauans began in the 1950s. At the time, Hawaii had a booming industry in sugar and pineapple, and they greatly needed labor. So many of our Tokelauan families who came from Olohenga to Amelika Hamoa came to Hawaii. Many of them lived in a place called Pomoho Camp in central Oahu. with other immigrant labor communities. There's Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, you name it. We learned an English called Pidgin English, which was an English of commercial necessity. We also learned English formally instructed by our schools, the American public school system that all of us attended. So the migration then went from Tokelau to Amelika Samoa to Hawaii. Those of you who are here, Auntie Himhana went from Tokelau probably to Apiani and then here to New Zealand, Aotearoa. So we went in different directions. Okay? The other thing very different is that the migration to New Zealand was a resettled scheme. Okay? The government assisted in the movement. Okay? In our case, the case of the people of Tokelau who came from Olohenga through Amelika Samoa to Hawaii, we were forcibly removed. So the opportunities that we found in the new homelands were opportunities that were entirely found by our tupuna who came there. Okay. Nothing was waiting for us. There were no homes. In fact, the people were left stranded on the dock, and families and people came to help them. So a very different migration. Also, in the United States, Tokelauans are not recognized as a unique ethnic minority. Tokelauans here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, you are on their census. There's Tokelau that you can check off on the census. Tomato, us in the United States, we're not recognized on the census. So basically you can say that we are an invisible minority. Okay? We have no voice politically as a group, as Tokelauans. Okay? And for that matter, Pacific Islanders in the United States are a minority and have very little voice as well. Whereas I noticed the Pacific Island communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand are gaining a pretty powerful voice in your political process here. Not to mention the cultural impact in music and entertainment that the Pacific Islanders group have here in Aotearoa. So just a few things to show the different experiences, because yes, we have similar inside, but the official ways we were separated are very different. Here's a map of Hawaii. Hawaii consists of how many islands, Lumanaki? 8 islands. Okay. We happen to land in Honolulu, the middle island right here. And if you look in the middle, it says Wahiwa. Okay. If you look on towards the eastern side, the western side, that's Eva Beach. Some of us come from Eva Beach. Some of us also come, you see the word Laie, also come from way over there. So the demographic distribution of Tokelauans in Oahu is a big challenge to forming community, to forming an organization, because we're distributed all over the place. However, enough of a critical mass was concentrated in the central part of Oahu that we were able to continue what we think and feel were Tokelauan values and traditions through basically clan or family ties. Yeah. So some of the language continued to be perpetuated, some of the ideas about respect for elders, respect for each other, all of those things were perpetuated in ways that we thought we were doing. But again, because we had no elder council, we had toina, but they weren't a group that we could go to and say, is this Tokelauan? No one was there to validate for us what is Tokelauan and what is not. So we're basically flying by the seat of our pants and only learning from our grandmothers, grandfathers, and what our parents continue to teach us. So this is Oahu, Wahiwa in the middle. Next to us, military bases, big immigrant communities, just to give you an idea of the demographics of the area. In 1990, between 1990 and 2004, as a scholar or as a person who studies the Tokelau communities everywhere, I found that the Tokelauans in Oahu began to have an identity crisis. You would see trucks that have Tokelauan spread across the back, and I'm thinking, wow, who's that truck? I must be related to him or her, right? Babies began to be named Devaka. You know, I named my own grandson Tuiteavaika. So you see names like that starting to pop up. You know, we're identifying ourselves with the Tokelauan identity that we somehow had these stories, but never really grounded in us with the institutions that perpetuate values of a culture. Yeah. So trucks, babies, those were like symbols to me that, oh, hey, people are starting to think about their Tokelau identity. We were defined by other people as Samoans, not even Pacific Islanders. You know, when you meet people, you would say, oh yeah, I'm Tokelauan. They'd ask you what you were, just like they asked Nila, what are you? Is it Tokelauan or Samoan? Oh, you're Samoan. Everybody knows Samoans, but nobody heard of Tokelauans. And then we began to self-define ourselves. Self-definition comes from the community that you're in. And there were a few of us, critical enough mass, that we could come together and think about even things like starting a language school. Institutional challenges. And I already brought these up. And of course, these are like, you're not recognized by the state. So you don't get monies to run a school, a Tokelau school. And others that I won't go into. Organizational challenges. These, by far, to me, are the most challenging. Because these are challenges that come from inside your own Tokelau community. You know, I will tell you that right now. The community of Tokelau in Honolulu. And for many, many reasons. And the reason I say that is because I'm comparing it to the communities here. You have organizations based on the atoll you come from, based on the youth group that you're with, based on whether you live in Hutt Valley or Porirua, whether you're a shark or marlin. So these challenges, the He Maopopo made it very difficult for us to come together and perpetuate our language, revitalize our language. But we found a way. In 2004, and other people in Lumanaki will maybe tell you differently, but in 2004, a group from Nukunonu came through Honolulu on their way to the Pacific Arts Festival. Many of them were young, many of them associated and fellowship with our youth here in Honolulu. And they left this yearning in our youth to want to know more about their Tokelau families, want to know more about the language. They wanted to learn the dances that they saw Nukunonu dance. And the one thing they did also was Nukunonu left us all of their kauviva tonima. And, you know, I'm thinking, as one of the planners, I'm thinking, how am I going to distribute this tonginga to all the people who came and helped? I did not want to distribute the tonginga. I said, we can't distribute something like this. This is too valuable. And so I saw that as a sign from God that you guys need to start something with this tonginga. So that's, to me, that was the inception then. That was the, you know, the driving factor that led us to establishing, whether, I mean, even in its informal state, the Lumanaki Tokelau Amalika School of Language and Culture. And it started in a garage. Brother Nathan's garage back there. We had, 6 students at the beginning. I was in New Zealand at the time, but Bonnie and Mass Patamilio began to teach these children in the garage. Okay? The following week, the group doubled. Okay? Parents were sending their students, their children. The week after that, that number doubled. And I think after a couple of months, there must have been at least 30 students. And their parents would come, their grandmothers would come, and they would sit there and just enjoy seeing their children being taught the Tokelau language. And afterwards, of course, they had to do some songs and hatele. Okay. They had to do some songs and hatele. And what wound up happening is we had to move the school to a community hall. The other thing we needed to do is that in order for the school to have legal standing, we had to form a nonprofit organization. Another challenge that, we're not legal people, we didn't know how to do this, but one of the values or one of the lessons we learned from this formation is to partner with the community. Partner up with people in your community who know how to do these things, who know how to file applications to the IRS, who know how to do accounting, who know the different places in the government to go to file your application. So partnering up then is very, very important. But then what we did was we established the formal name of our parent company is Wellington Tokelau Community Incorporated. Our mission is very simple: to revitalize the native language and culture of Tokelau, and to enhance thereafter community, social, and economic sufficiency. Meaning that when Vihehio Thompson here graduates from college or high school or college or whatever he plans to do, he will be self-sufficient. He will not be depending on the government to pay his bills. He will also be so self-sufficient that he will be taking care of mom and dad and grandpa and his brother and sister who need help. So this is what I mean about the two cultures not necessarily clashing. You go and get that Western education, make yourself empowered to the point where you're economically self-sufficient, and you can promote the Tokelau values of guiding. Take care of your family after that. So our simple beginnings, our main program is Wellington Tokelau Fakaofo. The beneficiaries of this program you see right here, the students that we brought from Honolulu. One of our first things we did was we did a survey. We called it the Kalele survey. And Kalele, a gathering, netting of fish. So we netted information in our community. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to see how many people in our community actually spoke or used the language. But Wellington Tokelau Malika allows the language planning in the public domain of the community. It was also a site for interacting with parents, for planning when they go into their public domains. Performances through Lumanaki increased the status of language among younger speakers because they got to go all over Hawaii to perform every year. And today, they're right here in your midst. And it facilitates the greater visibility of the Tokelau community outside. So this is our hall. This is the Pomoho Camp Community Hall, where many of us grew up as immigrant children from Samoa to Honolulu. This is the group, this is their favorite part. Some of them roll their eyes during the language classes at the beginning of the school period. But when it comes to this, oh boy. So these are some of the students. This is our performance at the East West Center. They have an annual international festival, and we continue to be invited back to the center to perform. One of the things that we've been told that is very, very special is that it's not only the Tupulanga that is with us. We take our elders, so it's multi-generational, okay, and they love that. This is our performance when we opened for Te Vaka, who played at Brigham Young University in Hawaii in 2005. Some of our lovely young ladies. Our youngest member, but this was our youngest member in 2005. Okay, we have younger members now who are 2 and 3 years old who come to just play with us at the school. So this is Millie Girl, and if you come to the festival, you will get to see Millie Girl also perform. This is some of our young men. So this is the Nukunonu gift from the Malanga. that they left for us before we even started our school. This was our first recital at Pomoho Camp Community. And another performance in Kapiolani Park, which is a park downtown. This is part of the Makahiki Festival, okay? An annual festival that draws Pacific Islanders from all over. Another performance, this is 2007 at the East West Center. So you'll see that, you know, I mean, you see the happy faces on the children. They love, they love to dance. And what this does is it raises the status of the language in the community. Because the question is, why teach our kids Tokelauan? They're not going to use it in a job that pays them well in their future. So by raising the status of the language, we also are promoting the values of Tokelau through the words and through the songs. So our status planning now then continues with the Taki, and these are some of the Kauwhai Haluenga, the workforce of the Taki, some of our elders, but some of the key players who continue to do all the grit work in the background. I'll promote them here. Our status planning also included the Kalele survey. The Kalele survey was a project that got us funding from the Administration for Native Americans, and it really raised the level of you know, recognition for the Tokelauan community in Central Oahu. Partnering up with outside organizations also raises the level of visibility for your promoting your own projects. We partner up with ANA, University of Hawaii's Department of Linguistics, who help us to develop a survey. Also the Language Documentation Center, who is helping us develop other language materials. Other partners, One Teeth Technology. The largest retailer in the world, Walmart, recognized our group with gifts of you know, cash donation. I mean, also helps that a Tokelauan girl is a manager in one of their stores. So you know, you use all the avenues that are available to you. So again, this is in our clubhouse and members of the community of Illuminati. The methodology within the survey is we first asked whether they speak Tokelauan or not. And then we also asked how they felt about Tokelauan. Do you think you need to know it to succeed in life? The target population, we targeted Central Oahu because it was easy enough to do within a year's period. And some of these results are very interesting. Not to mention, very, very sad. 4% of us do not speak it at all. 47% do not understand it at all. 63% do not read or write Tokelauan. Only 8% of the people we surveyed speak Tokelauan native life. Under 10% even understand it. 7.8% read and 8% can write. Okay. So at least, although the results are you know, you can't possibly be happy by looking at results like this, but at least it gives us an idea of the challenges we have in our community to revitalize and perpetuate our native language. You can actually find our survey if you go on ANA's website. You'll find that our survey is posted up there for other ethnic communities trying to revitalize their language to model. So yeah, Tokelau is on the map. There are immeasurable results. Results you cannot measure through doing the Kalele survey. Okay. We found other Tokelauans who we didn't know were there in the community. Okay. And we found that some of these Tokelauan families had tons and tons and tons of descendants, you know, grandchildren, lots of mokukuna, so on and so forth. And of course, the prestige that it brings to the community of Tokelauans in Honolulu, you cannot put a measure to that. to continue forth. We received permission from the Tokelau government to digitize the existing Tokelau language, Tokelau dictionary. This is a dictionary that was, I think it was 1987, Ioane, 1987. This dictionary needs a lot of, new additions, but so we've digitized it, and as soon as, we are able, we'd like to share that online with anybody who wants to access it. Also, some of our projects we're developing Tokelau Learners Dictionary, something more accessible to the children, and also developing curriculum that's focused on the learners in our community. These are some of the elders that continue to support the program. Without them, we don't have a backboard to bounce on. We have no foundation without these elders. And one of the critical things is that for our community, many of this generation, many of this, and with that goes the wisdom and the knowledge that they have. So we're trying to stay close to them and trying to get them to express and teach us as much as they can. More of our elders. This is the Learner's Dictionary. This is a school session that we have. As you can see, it's very informal. But we try to get the children to speak Tokelauan. So if they need to go to use the bathroom, we won't let them go unless they ask you in Tokelauan, and they need to ask you properly, like so informally speaking, things like that. This is our morning assembly. One of the key things that we found with community development, with language maintenance, is community development. Because we want to perpetuate and revitalize our language, we have formed a community around this goal and this project of people who are like-minded and people who want to promote and revitalize the language of Tokelau. It's a project in progress. Okay. By no means do we have a manual or a formula as to how to do this properly, but we're learning, like I said, from the partners that we made at the universities, other groups who are in a similar situation. And the group here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we're hoping that we can also tap into your knowledge, and we have tapped into the knowledge of people here like Dr. Yuta, Ioane to help us in our efforts. How do we maintain this momentum? Well, one of the reasons we're here is to do just that, is to maintain the momentum by showing our students, the learners of the Tokelau that this is a valuable thing. By bringing them here to see their tamana and their matua and their brothers and sisters, their kainga here, we're hoping that the momentum continues, and we already have been training some of our students to be the teachers, and they are teaching when we're not there. So pray for us, continue to send good energies in our direction. We're very happy to be here, and we thank you so much for honoring us by inviting us here to fellowship with you this evening. Matayatu kinamatua, manatamana, matehakala potopotonga, tukulanga, Vakaola i Wellington, I te awanoa kutuku mai ki te lumanaki Tokelau, ki o mai e mātou o i fellowship tātou, me share hokin tātou manatu. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I welcome any questions from the audience. There's no more questions. I know it's a long evening and everybody's hungry. You can ask me at the dinner table or at the line. Okay?
Do we have another round? Otherwise, please, if anyone does have anything to ask.
Katulo ko na tamana matua te whilihio hoki kai ele ko hia alo ho tai lava. Ha tai mo te manai te matala te lei o te kaumainga o te tala. E koe peki ka malo atu ha tai. Manai lele te I te kita I toku pā mai ki loto ki nei whakalongo ki tau tala ko whai mai. Malo ha tai. Ko hia ha tai. O vena hoki. No ve na to la hi ta to lo to ki nei te manino hoki te kau mai ko ta ko heli vela ko te recognition te malo tel e o Amerika ki tangata na minority group la de ala Tokelau ko ta ko heli e vena hoki la te te hitete o Hawaii Tokelau pe ke he mai te kila te hitete o Hawaii.
Te tete o Hawaii, he amana kia hoki lātou, he ngove ia pehe kalapa tutonga, pehe ni tino hoki e taku ni tino Tokelau. He recognize e lātou ni. E tuhela walama ke federal government, ni te lātou position, te tua lātou I nā tino Tokelau vea I Hawaii. Ko te tupulanga mo mua na o mai Amerika Samoa, e taku lātou ni American Nationals, ni tino mai Amerika Samoa. Ko te tahi challenge I taku kilek te me tēnā, e he mahoi mātou o I vote, o I pālota, ki nā representatives a mātou I te mālo. Kino ko mātou e he ni citizens o Amerika o te United States, ni. E lawa te awala mahoi ai koe na Hanoi, e taku naturalize application ni mai nā hukenga pe fit koe ke hau ulu ki loto o Amerika hakahiti heni ai koe ni e lahi nā kawitauli te mea tēnā. Kako nā tino mātou nao mai Amerika Samoa ko mātou ni American nationals, not full citizens. Yeah. But there are many minorities in Hawaii who are not recognized by the state of Hawaii and the federal government. And part of that has to do with numbers. There's very, very few of us. Part of that also has to do with the fact that the communities, the larger host community defines us as Samoans. So you really have to explain to them, Tokelau, look on the map, find Samoa and look right above it. You will find 4 islands, that's Tokelau. So, you know, that's the kind of education that I do it every day just about. You know, you say, yeah, oh, are you like Tongans? No, we're not like Tongans. We have our own language, our own culture, very unique. So, you know, so that's part of the problem. Dr. Yuta, small numbers, but that continues to be a problem as far as gaining state assistance for programs like this, like the revitalization of the Tokelau language. And I'm so happy to find out, as of last year, that there are schools now, Tokelau language schools in New Zealand, that have the support of the state and other private organizations that you can apply to for grants. So it's very encouraging to hear that, because that's our vision, that's our dream for our language school in Hawaii, is to maybe not necessarily get state support, but to get support nevertheless to realize our dream.
Yeah, no, tēnei kua hau ni mai. Ai hoi talau ki e nei kai le mai watan tautalanga nai hoi a ngai. Nai ho ho ke hoi e ia ngai tamai tukulanga. Le me meki o ai ki la tu te audience ku tau hei ai tukulanga. But ke hoi pe hoka herope ni tato plokala me o ka mata hoka lei e ke hoka uma hoka lei. Please.
I look important by standing over here.
Thank you, Seno.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to have a time here to the audience. My speech is about navigating life. That was the topic I was sort of like given to address in this generation. So I want to be very clear. The tools of surviving in this generation. I'll just highlight some 4 keys, and these are sort of like the keys that will open doors to your future. You got to pretend if you were a 11-year-old, I'll try and talk to you like a 6-year-old, so I can get to the level. That's how I practice it. But so forgive me if I sort of like make a mistake. So the 4 keys that I'm going to highlight for us is God, parents and family and vision, your personal vision, and education, of course. And then I'll just those are some of my key highlights. Let's sing a song, because I never had a song. I'm going to make up one. I know I was sitting at the back there. It was really warm, and I thought, gee, I wish there was a little breeze coming through. And then it reminded me of a song that I learned when I was a young man. That I learned it from a scholarship cousin of mine, and it was called Angi Malie. Everyone knows this song, and it goes. I think the story goes that if you want to cool down, you have to go find a breeze. I know, or go look for a breeze. And I think the song is like this. Angi Malie, Angi Malie, te matangi tokelau, tokelau kapuenua, Angi Malie, Angi Malie, Angi Malie, te matangi tokelau, tokelau kapuenua, Angi Malie. Thank you, everybody. It sort of like helped me settle my spirit. So my key topic is around navigating life, the tools for this generation to have that I want to pass on. So it's a personal experience. It's all the mistakes I've made, and all the better decisions I've made. It's sort of like summarising this little talk here. So God, parents and family vision, personal vision, and education. So let's begin. So parents, see, God is a very important part of this talk, because it's kind of like in the Word it says that all things will pass away, but what will stay is the Word of God. And that's what I learned later in life. So I grew up to be a young man, and I made all the mistakes a young man could ever make. And then I met God. Obviously, my parents introduced me to God because we were raised in Poirua here, and we attended the PIC church. And I remember those years as a little child. We used to walk from Elsden, it's across the tracks to Cannons Creek. And we never had a car then, so there was a group of 7 kids, and sometimes the father would come along, but most of the time it was my mother and 7 children. So then we will get to the church, and when we sit down in the chairs, I saw in my mum, it was a big relief just to get there. And you get a sense that she was glad to be in the house of God. So that was really interesting for me now to know. But then it was an image, it was a picture for me to
carry with me. And then I made a relationship. I had a relationship with, I met Jesus through that process. I met Jesus and I invited Jesus into my life, and he tells me in his Bible that he values me. He tells me in his Bible that I'm significant, and that there is a purpose for me, for my life. He has for me. So those are the sort of things I sort of like picked up as a young Christian. So so here was a verse that sort of highlights that picture of a purpose that in Jeremiah 29 verse 11, and it says something like to the effect of, for I know the plans I have for you, saith the Lord, plans to prosper and to encourage. Well, I was hoping I could actually fake it by saying it, but here it is here, let me tell you the truth. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. So those are sort of like big words that sort of like set my life on fire again. And that's God. So if God's word lasts forever, what could I base my life on? But his word. And parents now, now going back to my parents' days, the perspective that I bring to you was my parents was already in Samoa, and they were sort of like teenagers, I think, and I think Samoa was the centre of education in the Pacific, close to Tokelau, and they eventually met up with each other and they had children. There was 4 of us, were born in Samoa, so I was the baby born in Samoa, and then we came over in 1962. So there was a story our mother shared that they were invited. That was really awesome opening, as they were invited. So our story was these 2 couples, these 2 lovebirds, my mother and my parents, had 4 children, and then they decided to come to New Zealand. I never had this conversation with my parents as to why they came. I just assumed they just wanted for a better life. But we eventually made it to New Zealand, and the story goes that some relatives came to New Zealand, worked hard, saved their fare, sent us over, and came to New Zealand. That was the sort of like routine that was going. And I heard that other people did the same thing. So there was people that decided to come over, take charge, get a job, have a future, come here to New Zealand. So that was our beginning. And then later on, my mum and dad had 3 more children. Now I mention them because I want to talk a little bit about them. Oki is my older brother. He's a bit of a he raised us as well. There was our parents and there was our brother Oki. He was kind of like a big brother but another father. So to me he took up the slack of that the parents had. They went working. They went to work. My parents went to work, and Oki would make sure that we were fed. My nappies was changed and stuff like that. I remember a story that my mother had to describe our trip from Samoa to New Zealand. She would say something like, listen son, when we came, you were born in Samoa, and when we came, we changed your nappies on the plane and we threw your nappies out the window. This is something, it's amazing what sticks in your mind, eh? But then I remember that same story was attached to my brother. He would change my nappies as a little boy, as a little baby. And so those sort of memories that I linked to Oki. Now Barbara is my second oldest. She was an amazing sort of girl. She grew up and she didn't mix with our culture. She quickly couldn't quickly enough get out of the house. So she got herself she trained as a nurse,
And it was almost like talking to a Balangi, you know, my sister Balangi. And she had that sort of, you know, character about her. And those sort of things that I remember about her. Suia, she had a good mix of both the European culture and the Tokelauan culture. She could mix it on both sides. And then she could be my big sister at the same time. And yeah, more closer. Barbara was a little bit distant, but then there was my sister. And then there was me. I was the baby, and I'm the middle child. And then born in New Zealand was Manatua. Now Manatua was the first baby born here in New Zealand, and I saw in his school years he was becoming more authoritative in the family. He was taking charge. He was more academic, you know. Well, I was more, you know, tawhao and play. He was more in the books, and I was slightly different. And then there was the twins. And the twins, Jennifer and James. Now James was into his reggae. Eventually, he loved his reggae. He wore those yellow and purple and red hats. And yes, he was smoking and that was his little experience. And then there's Jennifer, who was a bit of a missionary for the family, and she was outspoken, she was colourful, and she talked to me more like a bigger sister than a little sister. So it was amazing, my family. And my family was always, you know, when they got old, they all had a job. And it was amazing. I thought, well, that's amazing. They had a job, and they had somehow we sort of like collected something from our parents in those early days. So that's our family. So parents, I just want to move on to our parents. Parents are influential. Now, it says in Deuteronomy, here's I'm using scripture just to explain myself, because in Deuteronomy 6, it says God is telling Moses to tell the parents about all the goodness of God. And then he said, tell them when you're walking, and when you're running, or when you're waking up, or when you're going to bed. So the concept there was about if you want to teach your kids, do it when you're having fun. And those, I think we got a little bit of that, but I didn't know anything about that until I met Christ. So just putting that aside, and then I went to the local schools here. I got a job. Got an apprenticeship. I left college. Went to the New Zealand Railways, and it was an amazing sight. The New Zealand Railways. There was more Tokelauans than I've ever seen all in one place in any other time, apart from tournaments. There was a lot of Tokelauan men there, and they either were cleaners, or they weren't the trade people, but they worked hard, and they were old men, and they were strong, they were well respected, and they earned their money. They were there every day, and we shared a lot of meals together, because every time I went to the canteen, you know, you couldn't help but give your food away, because they were either on your way back to your base, standing there somewhere, and just leaning on a broom or something, and then you got your sausages, and then you got your pies, and then you're wondering, well, should I go around this way? Or should I go straight through? Some of the men, you know, you just got to laugh, because they're really amazing characters. But from time to time I did go around, but now and then I did go straight through the gauntlet, and I gave some sausages away. So that was the New Zealand Railways, and I was there for I was there for a good 9 years. So that was a long time for me. I didn't really move around too much, but over the years there was the New Zealand Railways. I moved on to the prison service. I wasn't a prisoner, but I was. And then someone said, "Hey, Sino, this is in the railways." Someone said, "This is an Australian Australian cleaner." Said, "Oh, you look very down and out, Sino." I said, "Yeah, how do you know?" I said, "Oh, I could tell. Oh, you're a bit of a psychologist." And then I said, "Well, what should I do?" And he said, "Oh, go have a holiday." And so that's what I did. I just packed up and I just went on a holiday for 6 weeks. And I flew to England, and I flew to Bahrain, and I flew to Switzerland, and I was all over the place. Within 6 weeks, I was all over Europe. And I didn't say I was a Tokelauan, but I did meet up with a couple of people, and I did say I was from New Zealand. And everybody knew who New Zealand was. Somehow, everybody knows New Zealand. But I went to Canada, but I had fun. And then I came back, and after a while, that same cleaner said, "Oh, you got that look in your eye." "What look?" I said, you look like you belong here." This is the Australian cleaner, and he was toothless, he had guns all over from this to that. And then he said, "You should leave." I said, "Should I?" By then I'm over 20. By then I'm over 20, and this guy was making decisions for me. And I said, "Okay, I'll go then. What should I do?" "Well, everybody else is going to prison. Why don't you go?" So I did. So I resigned. I missed out on what's that money? You get money when you leave. Redundancy. I missed out on redundancy. I mistimed it. Everybody else got it after I left. And then I was there. My first day, I did the training for 6 weeks. My first day in an actual prison. I actually went to a women's prison, so it's quite interesting. We've got women in front of me here. My first day, I was feeling really nervous in my spirit, and at the end of the day, I went to my boss and I said, she said to me, "How did your day go?" I said, "I'm going to quit." And she goes, "Oh, that's okay. You go have a rest, go home. Just relax. Let the day wash off." That feeling of washing off felt really good when she was doing this. This is my own lady, and that was Mrs. Andrews. Just go and relax. And sure enough, I came back the next day. It was good advice, I tell you. I came back the next day and I was there for the next 4.5 years. So that was a bit of a challenge for me. And then I realised, what should I do next? And then I thought, okay, everybody else is going up. Why don't I go up there? Meaning, look for management work, So I decided, okay, this organisation is not offering any sort of training or education for, you got to go out to get the education, come back. So that was my intention. I decided to leave the prison service and go to get a management training. So I somehow, after all the decisions I made, I went to Polytech, I put out a Polytechnic, and I did a business and I majored in management. And then after 3 years, I graduated on a business diploma and an advanced business diploma. So I had some qualification for a business management job. Thank you. And then a job came up, this youth worker job. But at the time, while I was working all these main jobs, I was doing youth work. I was youth work for our PRC church, and youth work for Youth for Christ. So I was doing that for some years. And I did it with Alisa of all people. Yeah. Yeah, we worked together in youth work. And
good job too.
Thank you. And and Wally too. Wally was one of the leaders. He was more senior than me, but I got there. He was already done his time, and I started my work, and I was really nervous doing youth work. But youth work helped me sort of like keep myself occupied. So for after making all the mistakes in the world, I met the Lord Jesus Christ, and I worked for Him. Basically, I worked for Him in the church, in PRC Youth Group, and I worked for Him in the Youth for Christ ministries. So, but effectively, I worked with. I counted how many boys I actually worked with. So I worked with about 3 sets of boys, and you work with them for 3 or 4 years. So you get them through their teenage years, in a sense. So that's when the troublesome time comes in for them. And so I worked through about 31 boys I worked with. And also, I thought, oh, that's an interesting statistic. And maybe only a couple of them went to jail. I don't know whether it was for my fault or their fault. But it was really interesting that they would say hello and I would say hello, and it was an interesting time for me, youth work. So when I did my business studies, I worked as a youth worker for Forest City Council, and I've been there ever since. And so it was then, for what was going to be a business sort of role I was going to get myself into, became a community development sort of role. So that's been me ever since, to this day. Yeah, so that's my sort of like working career resume. Yeah, and so that I want to move on to personal vision. Now, there's a story I recall in Genesis about Isaac had a son called Jacob. Now Isaac was a really honest guy. He worked for the Lord, and then he had a son called Jacob. Well, after some years, Jacob decided to leave the umbrella of his dad, and he made a decision to work for God, so on his own strength and on his own turf. So he left his homeland to go work somewhere else. So he had a dream, and he made a vow that he would work for the Lord. So, so in that sense, what I'm trying to say here, that when I started this journey, I had a vision that was from my parents. My parents had the vision, and I had to sort of like then get my own vision, my own personal vision, and then I had to ask God, what is those visions? What do you want me to do? Because God is a big God. He's got lots of work for all of us to do. But I had to ask Him, what did He want me to do? And somehow things will just fall into place. There was this particular time where I was asking God, what do you want me to do? And I was doing youth work, and He said, here's a burden, take it and go do something with it. And here's the burden He gave me. He said, there's not enough PI men in the church doing leadership work. It's all being girls, it's all being young ladies. And I thought, oh, okay. And I was starting to think, okay, this is the culture of PIC. And I don't know, it could have been beyond that. And I thought, what am I going to do about this message? I'm going to tell people. So I thought, I asked the Lord, I said, what can I do? He said, call a meeting with some men. And I called about 5 men, and you might know them. I called Ali Viliamu, Tilo Malaysia, Solomon Asua, Latu Tomanga, and Fred Moy. Here was 6 of us in Solomon and Kala Lesmavau. I called these guys and I told them this God-given burden, I'm sure of it. And I said to them, listen, there's just not enough PI men in church leading and being good role models for even young men. Even the young men weren't coming through, and they weren't. Yeah, so that was the issue. So I said, well, I can't do it. First of all, I bowed ship because what I said is, listen, this is the problem, but I can't do it. But I can't do it. You guys got to do it. So everybody started to talk. Someone said, oh, I'm busy too. And Ali was busy. And then it left the other 4 to take over. So what they started, they started to meet like a Bible class. That's for 4 of them, a home group. They met in their house once a week, 4 guys, and then for the next 5, maybe 6 years, they created a ministry that allowed young men, PI men, to come in and serve. And they call themselves No Names. I don't know whether you knew No Names. No Names reached the region. And not only did it reach the region, it went up north, it went down south. They took that vision with them all over the place. And I don't know what they eventually ended up doing. And then they got pastors to sort of like oversee them and support them in their work. But man, that was from the beginning, from asking God for a vision. So that was another vision experience that I had. Another vision experience I had was to look for a wife. I needed it because I wasn't married, I was single, I was getting old, and I was 32 at the time. And then I said, Lord, I think I'm sick and tired from my current wife, which is youth work, because they spend all your money. And because I go to work, all my money went to either church or the youth ministry. And then I said, Lord, I had enough of these guys. I want a real wife. So I prayed, right? I prayed, and prayed, Lord, what's up? And then an opportunity came to me to go to Tokelau. So I went to Tokelau. Oh, Lord, you want me to go get a Tokelau wife from the islands? So he didn't respond, but I went to Tokelau Fakaofo, and I sat in front of the moon. The moon was right there. Right, the moon was touching. And I said, Lord, I came here for a Tokelauan wife. Tell me who it is. And then I got a name. So the name was to find her, right?
Oh.
So, but I still got a lot of work to do. So I felt that the Lord was asking me to go back, tell to find her what you know. So I went back February. Went back February. Was over the Christmas break, and I procrastinated. But the day I arrived back in my house, the Tupaina was in the house praying with my mother. And my mother at the time had split from our dad, and my Tupaina was there praying and supporting my mother. It was an amazing moment. I procrastinated for 6 months. I didn't tell her anything because this is a bit too much. My mum needed to go, needed to be dealt with first. So, yeah, sure enough, yeah. And then I told her, hey, I had a meeting with her to find out. I said, the reason for this meeting is it was very business-like. The reason for this meeting, I want to ask you the opportunity to maybe consider that we'll go down this track. Yeah, exactly. And with the possibilities of getting married. So I've never asked a girl out ever before, and this is it. I did it like that, and then she said no. So okay, fair enough. I think a year passed, and God burdened me again to go and ask this girl again. And she had a different answer. She said, let's check it out then. If it's really God. Okay then. And so we set, for a whole 8 months, we set 4 dates. We already calendared it out. And at the end of the 8 months, we'll have a decision. So we made sure we went out for a date, and we all went out to places where we all could be seen. So we went to a wedding, we went to the movies, and all that stuff, keeping it all safe. And then the day came. She gave me an answer. She said, the answer's no. I said, are you sure? We've gone through all this time, and I said, okay. And I said, no, sorry, that's not what I said. I said, because you haven't given me an answer, I'm going to release you from my request. And then she said, yes. That's how it happened. Sorry. And for the first time after 2 years, I think, 2 years pursuing her, I held her hand. So a vision, personal vision. Can I show you that picture? So, you know, that sort of visioning, asking God, here's the result of. Yeah. That photo was taken when my next trip to Tokelau. That was the day on the eve of me leaving to go to Tokelau. I went with my father-in-law and my mother-in-law and my son, Emi, and my nephew. This is Noro. Not only because it's my sister-in-law's name, it's Oki's wife, but Noro means to me, I waited on the Lord. That's what I named her. And Emi is my wife's friend. And it's Petra Rose. She's 3 Kaikopo. All the years I waited. Good. So it's really important. It's really important to me. God is really important in my decision making. That was a real personal one for me. You know, one of the things that I helped serving the Lord. Yeah. So you know, I'm trying to be a father, the best father that I could ever be, and the best husband I could ever be. Yes, it's a joy to be at where I'm at. And we're in a community. She really loves her community, the Tawa community. And I'm in between both camps, Tawa and Wakaola. And I laugh on her there and there. Yeah. So that's probably one of my major achievements. That's because I've allowed God to be the driver of my life. Family goals. So another project that somehow I'm in a community development role. There's only 2 community development people in Forest City Council, and I can create projects as well. That's one of the beauties about community development. You can make it up as you go along. And Strong Pacific Families has been one of those projects. And God has sort of like thrown this thing at me and go do something with it. So what we do here is I've supported a project that's come from Ministry of Social Development. It's come into the area. They wanted to do something in Pororo. So the first thing they do, they touch base with the local communities, and then they try their very best to get me for 4 months. I said, no way. You don't need me. You've got excellent community development people who are locals. you don't need me, because I come with resources. But they would have got them anyway. But the fact is that it's got to be a community-driven project, eh? And the way that I sort of force things to happen is not doing anything about it and let the community do it. So yeah, they got going for the first year, and then eventually they got me on board, and it's an amazing project. It's sort of like it is strengthening community families, and I've been able to do the community thing with it, and also I'm able to add the godly thing in it. It's amazing, and they accept it. It's so what I call in council terms a faith-based project. So it's like a general sort of description that people won't have any fear about it. But when another faith-based project I'm part of is a prayer breakfast. So you rally those who want to pray for your city to pray. So this is the second year we're going to do our prayer breakfast. We invite everybody to a venue, and we'll pray for the first hour for our city, and we have the mayor there to open things up, and we'll pray for our city for the first hour, and then we're going to use that. We're going to invite families to come along, and we're going to give them the resource on how to do that. And then there's the breakfast itself, where you get a guest speaker, and then you at tables pray. We're inviting business people to come along and around table, so we pray for their businesses, local businesses and schools. So it's an interesting project to be able to use your faith in the mix. Yeah. So that's Strong Pacific Families. It's sort of like a vision that's sort of like captured my heart. Yeah. And education, I'll just quickly wind it off in education. It's enough has been said about education. We have some great speakers to speak on education. But just to summarise about what I felt, that education does open doors. You know, tell your young people education opens doors, it extends your mind. So in summary, just like to summarise here, say that I've highlighted the importance of God in my life, the influence of parents and family members, and the impact of establishing godly visions and personal vision. I forgot to mention that this year we've introduced in our family personal vision. So we've got a family vision. Our family vision comes from Ephesians 4 verse 28. I read it to us, and it says, "Let him that steal no more, or let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labour, working with his hands, and the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth." So three criteria there that I want to point out is let's get a revelation. The revelation I got is to read God's word regularly, daily, and God said He'll build His church on revelation on His word. The revelation I got is making better decisions, and you know, the difference between before and after Christ is amazing. If I were to meet the young man that I was before I met Christ, I would tell him a whole new different story. I would tell him something different. I would tell you what I just told you. Yeah. And that's sort of like me. I want to just like pass on to the young people that there is something that maybe you can be had if you had God in your life. And the second thing about that is, get a job. How amazing is that? So there's work, and and lots of things you can do from work. You can earn money, earn a living, bless people, and you bless people who really need your support. That's where the love of Christ, John 3:16, comes in for me. Yeah. So that's I think it's my talk. I'd like to finish off with this with a quote from, and it was slightly touched earlier on by previous speakers, and it's a quote from Dr. Michael Unger. He's a principal researcher of the International Resilience Project, and he said something like, I've changed it just a little bit to mix in with the community, and it goes like this: resilience. What's resilience? This is his definition of resilience. Okay, resilience is both an individual's capacity to navigate community resources and a condition of the individual's family and community and culture to provide those resources in a culturally meaningful ways. I thought that was a good quote to end with my talk. And this is obviously what this is doing, what these opportunities are, this opportunity to have speakers come and speak in front of you. I really enjoyed this evening. Thank you very much.
Stories with us. I know they wouldn't have been that easy to share, but I thank you for having the heart to bring those things here. And I'm really sorry that the young people that you were targeting your presentation on couldn't be here, but we've got our young ones in the front to make up for that. But it was really awesome listening to those personal experiences. So thank you very much for that. It's also a time to make comments, please.
Because I know Noroa and Himi, when they were babies, I'm very touchful and I'm very proud of Amatua Onoroa Mahimi. Papa, I used to play together. I used to make activity together with their mom. I used to interact with them. I was so grateful. And I know Noroa speak Tokelauan very well in English. And ko kitea hoki he tamaiti tonanumanaki, which is one lucky. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your permission. I just make a comment. I'm very happy, and when I measure this speech, I think to them, I wish a lot of young people here to listen to the message, because including our way of Christian life and also our culture between the parents and their children. So I'm happy to acknowledge that, and also our mother, Huhelna, also Makalita and Yuta, to stay behind to witnessing the last speech of our. But I have something I have to do. Why my son did not mention my name, including in the Hawara youth of the North. You know what happened? He took me way up to Kaitaya, Whangarei, 90-mile beach, you know, and other center in the north. It took me 4 days as a treatment. So from there, I approached this young man looking after the youth, and I started counting things for him without the all head mahaniki.
But from there, I saw the kind of leadership. You know, we are battling to the future and leave everything behind us and see what God pointed at us to do in the future. So thank you, and also you, Nila. I admire with your mother your speech this afternoon, and I wish the Tokelauan youth, even especially our Vakaola youth, they own the day. That's why I came here to support and let them, all the parents come here to support them. Ne, kahit ay kupa na youth o tato te matanga kao, kahit ay hoki te toyan dia tueni he malohi lawa ka pono e papi te kunga o tato matanga ya kahit ya mau lawa tato matua mak tato uma e ola me te malohi awa i tamahana o ni tato mana kahawai tato to na matua ka malohi mai yo te maku tu lawa ya ka malohi to i to na tak atai jam no
Hai.
Malo. Ko ingo ko Alisa Isopo, and that's my dad, Ituini. I am part of the Vakaola Tokelauan youth, and in 2006, I'm just looking for our DD. In 2006, we ran our first Vakaola Tokelau conference. In 2008, we decided to run a symposium. And although there are only a minimum of people here tonight, our main vision, this is just a piece of the big picture that we're trying to do. But our main purpose was to record the stories of our people, to encourage our youth, but we also understand that there are no resources out there, and that this was an avenue to record your stories, which was block on the way, and also to the other our special guest speakers that we had tonight. But even though we've only delivered 86, but I can tell you that these DVDs are going to go out to, New Zealand, Australia, Samoa, Tokelau. Already we've seen 2006 songs, but even though there's only a small group, this your message here, and anyone else's message is going to go throughout. Our people are going to have access to that. So I just wanted to reiterate that, and I just want to say for your stories, and it's encouraged me, and it's actually motivated me to continue to do the work in order to maintain our young people's, for them to maintain the Tokelau. But I also want to encourage our young people to get involved with the groups that exist already, tap into their organisation and be part of the big picture, be part of the vision.
Acknowledge some of the support that we received for tonight from, for example, Vakaola organisation who owns this building, also from Net Pacific, Whitireia Polytech, and also the planning group, a couple of which you see here, myself and Alisa, and Sapaya as well. And this has been a very difficult time for us to try and plan something, particularly with the tournament coming up. But we've made it, and I'm very grateful for all of you coming through. So once again, on behalf of the planning group, thank you all very much, particularly the speakers, for coming tonight. And last but not least, I would like to invite Hetoe Aina Mole Mole Te Hokai Tātou Po he Taloheanga.
Ngona lo te dia. O kwa ka to ku pa hu mo to ya. A to apa o ke me ne youth conference to ka. Witnessing out me ne wa me ha to apa o ke. Te me ho ki ana. Tawa na wa ko ke ha ki. e ko ko te we lava ko he mahuta mai te tokalahi o na matua na tamana na mahuta mai ke lango te ne ho mo mo a tonu ho tahi lava te ha mo mo o mai lango ma ka ma ke kila mai ma to we mai lango to ya na hana ho ka te mea to ka lau ka te nganga i loto i e ako ai e tahi ma tanga ke lato ki te mea e taku o tupu langa o he nuku me ia e whakawhitai atu e ko la mona e tato whanau te tāua me te whakatāua i a nganga o matua ko te Tokelau. Ako tahi lama te mea o i loa o he ni iau. Te hamahino ki te polua na be mai tana kupu. Hamahino te hale hamahino ki te polua. Beka lama tana kupu. Ko Tokelau e atu nuku e maa keke lato maa. On the top of it, they are law-abiding citizens. What a privilege. They, the Tokelauan people, are law-abiding citizens. How Rocky people say to another organization, you are law-abiding citizen? No. Only the Tokelauan. Awako ke lato ke te lato mea. O ke loa te atu nuku nei. Tokelau he wai loa I loto te hamanino, wai loa I loto na maha. Na mea, he ni mea mita i tātou. Kai hoka lahi ai te vikinga o te tua, hoka I loa tuai te mawhitanga matu o mana. Te paenga e lolo ma sua mali e aro. Kai ki nā, te ki lātou na ka mea ma sui, ai mahi lapa te. Ya te puli ka he uo le e a ko matona to kalua ina he ko na he do ke ko na me vene ni maka tai mo tu mai ki nga pa na ka ka ma ke ke la to mo te mana ta to ta mana ne ho ke ko no ho lava ke pa ki te ki no ke la to ke ta uo ka ta uo ke a lo mai lava te tuo ki te koutou nā takitaki, ko ka mea ma takitaki. Tātou la ngona ka tahi. Nā mea e nei, nā mea hiri e nei, ko koutou whaia mo Tokelau. Te tiki e te atu, te koutou ngā mea. E vena hoki lao, na ki tātou ki te ai te tūlanga. Ki tātou nohon honga I tēnei atu nuku. Hoka hiri pēr te rofa te tua. Haka mani ati te koutou I nā ngā ngā ko koutou haia. E tapu ai tōtou anga nuku. Koutou tātou atu nuku nao mai aki tātou. Ai mahe wala te tua mutana hina ara. Ia, waka manui a te atua ki o tātou mātua. Nā tamana, ka mai he lawa hoki te ki lātu ma te whiawhia ki tātou tamana ia e tueni he malo. Ua noho lawa ke. Hai ia ma moli mau te tāua o te nila. Ia, ma kupu whiawhia la vai ai. Tuai tēnei tūlanga, ki tātou laka hapai ki tātou pālanga. Ato ifu ma tāro te tū. E langona whana. E haka ki kila ki mātua. Alai mau wola. Mō ki lātoa wā nai ngālu lua I mātua ma te loi mata. Tāwai. Ve nāo na haka manui atu ki te ki lātoa nai māfuta ki mātou I tēnei mafutanga. Ve nā hoki nā tamana ma nā mātua. O hai masui o ki lātou e pāki te ikuma. Kau mai e koe te manuia mo Tokelau. I tana nohon honga I ni hina nei. Kai mai he lawa loto ka inga. Te maftanga mātua maho anau. Au ai a ie hiu matona hina ngaru. Mātou kato e hoki atu ki o mātou ka inga. Mātou e hole atu ki tau fio. Taki ki mātou me te haunga le mu. Tau nuku ki mātou ka inga. Viki e koe I hiu. Mato, Niki, mato, mato, kau.